Welcome back to Miss Mooncycle's menstrual health class. I'm Miss Mooncycle, and today I'm going to share my experience with menstrual toxic shock syndrome. I know a lot of people have heard about what this is. I think that there's a lot of misinformation around, and I am here to share what my experience was, maybe ease some concerns on what to do and know how it exactly happens, and just know that knowledge is the best defense, and being prepared, being able to read the signs and being in tune with your body is the best way to defend against this condition. So I was 15 when I got menstrual toxic shock syndrome. It was the first year that I had my period. I hadn't even had it for a year yet. And this happened in June, my freshman summer. So my freshman year of high school going into my sophomore year of high school. I was traveling to California, where I live now, to visit family. We were going to see cousins around my age, and it was me, my mom, and my brother flying out, and my dad was meeting us later, which that is an important part of the story, and you'll see why. So when we landed, I immediately didn't feel good. I was on my period, so I had worn a tampon on my way out there, and I got to my destination and I was super tired, really fatigued, and I just chalked it up to jet lag because I was flying from Massachusetts, where I'm from, and we are 3 hours ahead. And so I just assumed that I was really tired from traveling. So I went to bed. The next morning, I was vomiting, I had diarrhea, it had really progressed, and I was obviously sick. Everybody just assumed that I had the flu though, because menstrual toxic shock mimics the flu. So when I wasn't really getting better, I wasn't able to keep fluids down, it was really hard for me to get out of bed. My mom brought me to my cousin's pediatrician. I was only 15 at the time. So they gave me a shot for the nausea and they sent me home. Didn't ask me any questions, just again, assumed it was the flu. And I did not get better. I didn't stop vomiting. In fact, it got worse. I couldn't keep any fluids down. When I was about to sip something, it would immediately come up. And it got to the point where I really couldn't even get up on my own. And so they brought me back to the doctors in that same day. So this is day 2 of vacation, second trip to the doctors. At that point, I could not make it into the doctors myself. My uncle had to carry me. My dad was still not out at this time. And I just remember sitting in the waiting room, and sitting in the chair was too much for me. Even sitting upright, I couldn't do it. And so the last thing I remember saying to my mom is, I'm just gonna lay here. And I fell forward and laid on the floor of the waiting room. And I was a really shy kid growing up. And so doing just not caring what anybody else in the waiting room thought and laying out just showed how sick I was. At that point, they moved me to a back room. That's when they realized that my heart rate was extremely high, my blood pressure was really, really low, and they rushed me to the hospital where I was in the ICU. I was put in the ICU, so the intensive care unit. And at the hospital, my mom was talking to the doctors, and they thought that I had meningitis. So they almost gave me a spinal tap that I wouldn't have needed. And my mom knew how painful those were. And so she asked them, how sure are you that it's meningitis? And they said 80%, at which point my mom did not want to move forward with something at 80%, just knowing how painful that would be for me. So we didn't move forward with the spinal tap. And while they were waiting for the doctors to try and figure out what was wrong with me, my mom had confided in my aunt and uncle. And this is why I think it's so important, important part of the story that my dad wasn't out there, because had my dad been out there, my mom probably would have been confiding in him. And I don't know that he would have put this together, but my mom said to them, I feel so bad for Shannon because she was so excited about this vacation, but she was so bummed that she was on her period because she didn't want to wear a tampon to the beach and the pool and stuff. Like, I wasn't comfortable yet. It was still my first year, and I didn't really, I don't think I had my period during a full summer yet. I hadn't, because I got it in August. So I hadn't had to deal with the whole like hiding the tampon string in your bathing suit yet. Anyway, that is when my aunt and uncle said, oh my God, does she still have the tampon in? She has toxic shock. So at that point, they went back to the doctors, they explained everything, and I had another incredible thing happen to me. And I just think it was a guardian angel looking out for me, that the infectious disease on call at that hospital happened to do a study on toxic shock back at Harvard, where I was from Boston, which was coincidental. And once they had known that information, they changed the course of action and they started giving me a bunch of fluids, because menstrual toxic shock is actually pretty easy to treat from what I've been told, but time is of the essence. So the faster that you get to the conclusion that it's menstrual toxic shock and start treating it, the better chances you have. So they switched the course of action, started giving me a bunch of fluids, and I will never forget what my mom told me they said to her. All of this is now being relayed since I was in a coma at this point. I was in a coma from the moment that they brought me to the ICU. I don't remember any of this, but when they started hooking me up to IVs, one of the doctors said to my mom, he pointed to all of the different IVs and he said, one of them is the Army, one's the Navy, and one is the Marines, and they are all working as hard as they possibly can, but your daughter has a 50-50 chance to live. I was in the ICU for 2-ish days. I believe I was in the hospital for a total of like 3-ish days. And I remember waking up in the middle of the night. I don't know what time it was, but it was pitch black. And I had no idea where I was. I also wear contacts, and so I didn't have my contacts in or my glasses on, and so everything was just really, really blurry. But the only thing that I saw near me was that red hospital button, so I started clicking that, and a nurse came in. I asked her where my mom was. My mom was sleeping in a chair in the room with me, and they just told me to go back to sleep. So I went to sleep. They came in the next morning, all really, really blurry from this point on, to be completely honest. The one thing I do remember is the doctor asking if it would be okay for, I think it was med students or doctors in training or something, to come in and ask me questions. And at 15, I think I didn't know that I really had a choice, and I just always agreed, right? Because it's a doctor and they're asking something of you and I'm confused. And so I said sure, but this part was definitely a little bit, I don't know if it was traumatizing, but it just made me feel really odd. There was about 15 different doctors in white lab coats that just surrounded my bed with clipboards, and they just started asking me all of these questions, and I didn't understand why they were asking me these questions. One of them was like, do you see bugs on the wall? Was I hallucinating? And I just felt a little crazy, to be honest. And at this point, I still didn't even know how I had gotten here, why I was here, what the future was going to look like. And so that part was just a little jarring as a 15-year-old. But anyway, I ended up being discharged from the hospital. The recommendation was to avoid all tampon use. Obviously, as a 15-year-old athlete, that was a really hard pill for me to swallow. I played tennis. If you're familiar with tennis, you wear tight white. And so I thought that that was really devastating. Now that I'm older, I don't wear tampons anymore, and it's really not a big deal at all. But at 15, it was hard. And they went through a bunch of different things that would happen, but I wasn't home. I was still in California. It wasn't my own doctors. So a lot of what the aftermath was, I wouldn't learn until later, and I did all of the checkups then. But they told me that the initial things that I would feel were my skin peeling. So all of my hands and my feet skin was peeling off. I lost hair. I had scabs on my scalp. So I remember the first time I took a shower after I left the hospital and I was washing my hair, it was coming out in chunks. And I also had scabs on my scalp. That was really confusing and scary as a 15-year-old. So a lot of it was just heavy to deal with. I would say the aftermath of it was more scary than the actual experience itself, because while I was going through it, I just thought I had the flu. But I'm so thankful for my aunt and uncle who have daughters that were able to put two and two together, that tampons are associated with menstrual toxic shock, and that they knew the signs and symptoms to look out for, and that they were able to tell the doctors what was wrong with me. And I'm so thankful for the doctors that were familiar with toxic shock and knew what to do to treat me once they had gotten that information. And I think from that experience, what I've learned is like really being in tune with your body, especially when you have a foreign object in there, because that's what a tampon is. And that would be my advice to young girls. I have another video before this where I talked about the signs and symptoms of menstrual toxic shock. I would advise you to go and watch that. It's super important. And I would also just advise knowing how to be in tune with your body, realizing if things are off. Maybe when you're wearing tampons, notice, do you feel more crampy? Do you feel like you have a headache? Different things. And if you do, maybe do one cycle trial and error and see what it's like without a tampon. Because if they aren't agreeing with you, then you should find alternatives. Once I got home, I had a lot of different checkups, and I suffered from a lot of mental side effects that the doctor said would only last up to a year. I don't know how long they lasted, to be honest. I think that the trauma of the mental side effects maybe perpetuated them. I do feel very strong and healthy now. This was 17 years ago, but it took a really long time for me to feel comfortable in my body again. I found that through support groups, connecting with other menstrual toxic shock survivors, connecting with a homeopath who helped me get back to equilibrium because I suffered from really painful periods afterwards, and also talking to a menstrual coach who taught me how to cycle sync. These are all things I absolutely wish I had when I was 15. I wish the doctors told me that instead of taking a prescription painkiller and birth control to fix my symptoms, I could have turned to diet and exercise and mindfulness practices. So I will do another video talking about that, but that was my experience with menstrual toxic shock. It sounds really scary, and it was, but it is completely avoidable, and it's very treatable if you do exhibit the symptoms. Just knowing the signs and symptoms is the first step. Knowledge is your best defense. And being aware of the products that you're putting into your body. I always recommend using 100% organic cotton if you are going to use tampons, but if you don't want to use tampons, that's great. There's plenty of other options out there as well. So that is my story, and I hope that you learned something from it. As always, if you have any questions, I'm here to answer them. Leave them in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe so you can join us next week, where I am going to pull a random topic out of a period pad box. Later!